This is Pat's Probe for Week 17. As Week 16 is now in the books with the loss last night, the Patriots have clinched its first losing season since 2000, snapping a 19-winning seasons streak, the second longest in NFL history. So what's up next for the men in their red, white, and blue jerseys? Well, Evan Lazar will break down the Patriots roster as we take an early look at the offseason for New England on this edition of Pat's Probe. Evan, how are the Pats fans feeling today?
Not very good. I think that we've been trending towards rock bottom all year long. We have officially hit rock bottom. I think at this point, there's a lot of questions about pretty much everybody in the organization, in the building from the top on down. Does Bill Belichick, is he the right guy to lead this team through this rebuild? I'm not saying this is my take. I'm just saying this is sort of the pulse right now. Is he the right guy for the job to rebuild this team? Because I think there are some fans that certainly feel that some of his decision making this season was about stubbornness and his, kind of unwillingness to tank the year and really wanting to try to remain competitive and go for a playoff spot and with a team that was clearly flawed. So you kind of
Bill
wonder if
Belichick on the hot seat.
I wouldn't call him on the hot seat quite yet, but I think that there's, some questions about whether or not his ego is going to get in the way of the Patriots really rebuilding this team the correct way. I think that there's some truth to that this year he played the veteran players. He played Cam Newton all year long. He played guys that he felt gave the football team the best chance to win, even in a situation where they probably, were better off losing, and certainly down the stretch here, they kind of made it interesting with those wins against Arizona and the Chargers and Baltimore, and that feels like a lifetime ago, but that did happen just less than a month ago in some cases. And I think that Bill Belichick, gave us false hope in those couple of wins that maybe this team could be capable of making a push when ultimately they were just a very flawed team to begin with. And I think that's the biggest question mark moving forward is what does Bill Belichick do in this offseason? What does he do moving forward to rebuild this football team? Because it's clear that they have a lot of issues in a lot of different places.
Yes, and we didn't get it. I want to one thing I want to do is clean up something that we didn't get. I don't know if it happened before our show or not. I think it did, and that was the move from quarterback coach Jeff Fish to Arizona.
Yeah.
So was that a surprise?
No, he was a guy that, given his resume, given just his history of kind of going from position to position, no one really expected him to be here long term. I think that when they brought him in the building, it was a guy that had a ton of experience, both at the college and the pro level. He had some experience at the college level, working in sort of mobile quarterback type of offenses, things that they might be doing with Cam Newton, and then obviously making it more adaptable for a guy like Jared Stidham as well. He's sort of tabbed as like a quarterback whisperer type of coach that can come in and work on mechanics and footwork and all those types of things. And it obviously took a lot off of Josh McDaniels' plate as well to have a quarterbacks coach so that McDaniels could focus on the big picture stuff as the offensive coordinator and let Jed Fish handle the quarterback room. But I don't think it was any surprise at all that Jed Fish had bigger aspirations than being a quarterbacks coach for the New England Patriots.
All right. Well, his quarterbacks or his former quarterbacks completed 9 passes last night. Stidham had an opportunity to play. Talked about that last week. Cam got the start, scored a touchdown, acted like Superman for a second, and then that was it. So again, had some really bad throws. Stidham came in, nothing really changed. So I don't know. You still feel pretty confident though that Cam's the guy next year.
I feel like in terms of my take on that situation has always just been sort of that if they're going to go the bridge quarterback route, then I don't really feel like there's a need to go and dip
Yes, I agree. Yep.
into another bridge quarterback. Like, what's the point in bringing in a Tyrod Taylor or an Alex Smith or a Ryan Fitzpatrick? Sure. I mean, those types of guys. Okay, maybe you look more respectable on the field. Maybe you are 8-8 instead of 6-10, right, or something like that. But you're still in purgatory. you're still in that middle ground of you're not a
Sure.
contender, you're not rebuilding, you're in the middle of nowhere. So I think if you're gonna roll this back next year, it makes a lot of sense to keep Cam as that veteran presence on the roster. That doesn't mean he needs to or win the job. That doesn't mean he needs to start week 1 or start the entire season like he did this year. It just means that that's the guy that they're going with as the veteran QB, and you like to hope that they draft somebody that maybe can outplay him right
Yep.
away and take the job from him in training camp and in the preseason. That's of course, ruling out any sort of big splash moves for a Matthew
Yeah.
Stafford or a Matt Ryan or something like that.
And isn't and that's still, I mean, Stafford, you would think he should have a good few years left in him. The problem is we're seeing with Stafford, and you see it with any of these quarterbacks that get older, they're gonna be more prone to getting banged up, and that's just not any good. You don't really want to see that, because, and then if you do go with a Stafford, then you are still thinking about winning championships now. So you're going to be making a lot of moves that are about winning championships. And that's the big question in the offseason is, are they going to go that route, or are they going to use one of their top picks on a quarterback? So
Right. And I would like to hope that even if they brought in a Matthew Stafford, that they still wouldn't rule out taking a quarterback at some point in the first 3 rounds of the draft. Maybe you don't take a quarterback, 14th overall or whatever they end up picking at. But I would still like them to take a quarterback. And I'm sure we're going to talk about Jared Stidham, but he just has not looked like the answer at any point in time, really, outside of that one preseason opener against Detroit last August, where he lit up the Detroit backups, and everybody was like, "Oh, maybe they have something here with this guy." And other outside of that game, he has been inconsistent. He has struggled with his poise in the pocket, his feel for the pocket. He struggled with decision making, timing, accuracy. I mean, any of the basics that really have to do with the quarterback position have not come cleanly to Jared Stidham outside of that one game. So I think the Patriots are looking for an heir apparent, a quarterback of the future, whatever term you want to use, and a short-term option this offseason, and they could be blowing up the entire room.
yeah, because it wouldn't be a surprise at all if Stidham was not even around next year.
Right.
Maybe his best shot is a number 3 that maybe bounces back from the practice squad and so forth. That's because look, if you're not gonna, especially if you don't start him this week, then you have absolutely no faith at all that he is in any way, shape, or form probably even going to be a number 2 next year. Because I mean, why wouldn't you start him in week 17 if you didn't think he would be at least a really good number 2?
Right, and I come back to it. I still think that Cam Newton is probably going to be here in some capacity next year, just because I don't think the Patriots nor Cam Newton really have a better option at this point in time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always have looked at it as the guy that I want them to upgrade over is not necessarily Cam, although it's Cam in the long term,
Sure.
certainly. But really, in the short term, it's upgrading Stidham, because if he was the answer, if he had it, if he was that type of guy, if he was a franchise type of guy. And I get that development's not always linear, and some guys take
Sure.
longer to develop than others. And the comparison everybody always goes to is Jimmy Garoppolo didn't really see the field until year 3 either of his career, and when Tom Brady was out for the Deflategate suspension, that was the first time that we saw Garoppolo in a regular season game outside of mop-up duty. He might have made one start in week 17, in a meaningless game. But ultimately, it just boils down to the fact that this quarterback room, compared to other quarterback rooms across the league, is really just it's one of the bottom 5 groups in the entire NFL at this point in time, and they need to look at potentially overhauling that entire room along with the tight end and wide receiver room too.
Yes.
It's not just put it all on the quarterback, but I think their Patriots are looking at an aggressive overhaul of their offense if they want to be serious about turning this thing around.
Well, even though we have one more show to go, bottom line is that after that, it'll be probably a couple of months. We'll definitely have you on to do free agency talk, draft talk, and so forth. But figured this would be a good time to take an early look ahead at the offseason. And one of the things that is critical and it's important in a rebuild is cap space, and the Patriots seem to be in pretty good shape as far as the cap is concerned. They're in the top 5 overall, it looks like, as far as their cap space is concerned. So
Yes.
let's start with, first of all, are there any contracts? J.C. Jackson, is he the one that's going to get the biggest raise?
So J.C. Jackson's a restricted free agent this offseason.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on what happens with Stephon Gilmore. Obviously, Stephon Gilmore is kind of the first domino I think that needs to fall. Maybe Joe Tooney, but mostly I would say Gilmore is kind of the first domino, that the first decision that they need to make. Right? Are they going to keep Gilmore for one more year? Are they going to sign him to an extension? Are they going to trade him or shop him in the offseason?
Pro Bowler, Stephon Gilmore, even though
Yeah,
you know what the Pro Bowl is, because Stephon Gilmore did not play really at a Pro Bowl level this season, but it's a reputation deal. I don't like the Pro Bowl at all. I hate the Pro Bowl. They all talk about the Pro Bowl on the networks, and you know, I actually respect more your final AP. This is your team. At least you know you get. And I know it's not like the media is be all end all. And I'd still like to be short up a little bit, but bottom line is I trust the final like AP whatever that is kind of deal than the Pro Bowl, which is a joke.
that's fair, but I would push back a little bit on Stephon Gilmore not playing at a Pro Bowl level. I think he was a little bit shaky to start the season, certainly, and had a really kind of rough, I would say, first 3 games of the season, and really one play against Seattle, the big touchdown that he gave up to DK Metcalf. But since then, since kind of week 4-ish, he's been really solid. But he has been hurt a little bit and banged up, so maybe in that respect, someone that played every game might be a little bit more deserving. But in terms of the product that he's put out,
he's still a very good player, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he's going to be. And how old is he?
He's 29, I think he is.
So he's still in, as far as his age is concerned, he's still in good shape there. So
right,
yeah,
he's 30. He's 30. So I think the biggest thing is that Stephon Gilmore wants a new contract, right? Everybody knows that. He's going to be a free agent, not this season, but the season after that, and he wants another big payday. He wants that double dip. It's sort of like what Darrelle Revis got,
which the Patriots don't normally give to their players.
Right. He wants that second big contract, and the Patriots are usually pretty, like you said, reluctant to do that, especially for guys on the wrong side of 30 at the skill positions at certain spots on the roster that don't usually perform at later stages of their career at the same level that they do in their primes. But I think the biggest thing with Gilmore is that, you look at the hierarchy and you look at what happens to that Patriot secondary when he comes out of it last night against Buffalo, and they end up giving up 300 yards and 4 touchdowns to Josh Allen, and 3 of them go to Stephon Diggs. Not all of them were with J.C. Jackson in coverage, but 2 of them were with J.C. Jackson in coverage, and there is a considerable drop-off, a noticeable drop-off from Gilmore to J.C. Jackson, and I think that ideally, J.C. Jackson is a very good number 2 corner, where especially when he gets targeted a lot because Gilmore's on the other side, that's J.C. Jackson's a great ball hawk, and he can go ahead and make all those interceptions that he's made all season long. He doesn't make all those interceptions if Gilmore isn't on the other side of the field, right? It just doesn't.
No.
They don't target him like that.
That's right.
So that's sort of the difference, I think, in J.C. Jackson and Gilmore's game, is that Jackson is really a high-end 2, maybe you call him a 1B or something like that, but Gilmore is the top dog, right? He's the alpha, and you have to have that sort of guy in this style of defense specifically, because the Patriots play a ton of man coverage, they play a ton of post-safety looks, they put their corners on islands all game long. That's their scheme, and if you don't have a guy that can take a Diggs one-on-one for 4 quarters, then you have issues like you did on Monday night.
And really, and since that is going to be the trickle down, it just shows you, when you look at the roster, there's just a lot of holes that need to be filled youth-wise. Yeah. There are some veteran players there, but there's just a lot of young players that need to come into this roster in the next couple of years, and completely. And this is where I understand exactly what Belichick was talking about in the offseason, when he's pretty much said, look, we were taking a look at win now, we're trying to build a Super Bowl. So we're trading picks, we're doing this, we're sacrificing the future for now. And yeah, it's going to eventually come back to you. It just happens. It's not an excuse. It's just reality. It's going to come back to you, and it's come back right now to the Patriots. Now, how quickly they can make the jump back, that's the question. Do they have to take another step back before they take that, that big step forward? That's going to be the big deal, because Patriot fans have been spoiled for so long that, in one hand, you have to think, if you're Kraft and so forth, you have to think, well, hey man, we deserve the fans to lay off for a couple of seasons if we're going to rebuild. We've earned that. But will they take that approach?
Well, I think it's a big question mark moving forward of how aggressive is Bill Belichick going to be? Because if you look at their assets, they got plenty of draft picks, they got plenty of cap space, they're going to have a top 15 pick. They got a lot of juice this offseason to go out there, and if they want to, they can go on an absolute spending spree in free agency, because remember, it's going to be a tight capped year. There's a lot of teams that are over the cap, or are projected to be over the cap, I should say. And the Patriots are going to be one of the few teams that have real cap space to go out there and spend, and it's actually a pretty good free agent class, especially at the receiver position. Kenny Golladay, Will Fuller, Corey Davis, Allen Robinson, obviously. I mean, Chris Godwin, all those guys are free agents. Curtis Samuel. It's a pretty good free agent wide receiver class, which is obviously a position of need for the Patriots. It's a pretty deep class in general of free agents, and the Patriots have the tools to go out there and make a big difference and make a splash. But the question really is that Belichick's plan? Is that what he's going to do, or is he going to do like what you said and kind of slow play this a little bit more? And look to kind of get younger players in here developed, and maybe he puts a little bit more on the plate of guys like Kyle Duggar and Devin Asiasi and N'Keal Harry, and he kind of pushes those envelopes a little bit more to see what he can get out of those guys before he goes out and acquires veteran talent to replace them. But I think the biggest thing is that when I look at Bill Belichick, and last night there was a point in him smashing the phone was the big sort of social media frenzy. But there was a point in later on in the game in the fourth quarter, when the game was over, that there was a TV timeout between the third and the fourth quarter, and Belichick was by himself about 30 yards away from everybody else. All the team, the coaches, everybody had moved down the sideline to where the ball was on that side of the field. And Belichick was at the total opposite end of the bench, just pacing up and down the sideline with his head down, just pacing back and forth. And I'm just thinking to myself, at his age, with the success that he has had, is he going to put himself through another 6-10 season? I just don't see it. I'm not saying he's going to retire. I'm saying I think he's going scorched earth this offseason. I just don't see how he's going to sit there and allow this team to sit back and be like, okay, I'm 70 years old, but we're going to go through a 5-year rebuild.
Yeah, that's the thing. His age, that's the tricky deal. Because you would think if he was a little younger, after everything that has been taken. See, it's a lot easier too as a coach. You love it. You love coaching players. That's what you love to do. And I can understand if he was younger, if he said, "Hey, you know what? I don't mind if I win 4 or 5 games for one more year, but I can't do it with veterans. I want to do it where I'm coaching. I'm coaching the next wave of players like I did when I first got here. That's going to re-energize me." Coaching veterans to a 5 and 6 win team, that ain't going to cut it. I completely agree. Right. But that's the deal, isn't it? Is that it doesn't really, you can't see him at his age taking the longer approach.
Right. And so that, tells me that I would think that he's going to be extremely aggressive. And they, like I just kind of laid out, they have all of the assets to be extremely aggressive.
But that means they also have to get like a Matthew Stafford.
Right. And it also means that they have to sort of go against some of their beliefs and how much they're going to spend at certain positions. This is a team that has never really spent that top dollar amount on a wide receiver. They've never paid a wide receiver. I think they were up there with Randy Moss when he signed his extension with New England after the trade. But other than Moss, who is obviously Randy Moss, they haven't really shelled out the cash for a wideout. Julian Edelman's always been pretty cheap. Rob Gronkowski was on a very cheap extension for multiple years after his breakout season in 2011. There were a lot of players like that for New England that they moved on from guys like a Dion Branch all the way back in the day,
Oh
for
yeah,
example.
yeah.
They traded him instead of paying him. They've never been a team that's gone out and paid that wide receiver $18 million a year. Right? It's just not what Bill Belichick does. And there is an argument to be made that that strategy has not necessarily yielded wins and losses or Super Bowl rings, right? It might be the flashy thing to do, it might be the exciting thing to do for the fan base, but a lot of those moves have not necessarily yielded results. So I guess maybe you can make the argument that he's been right about that. But spending on pass rush talent, spending on quarterback, spending on wide receiver, that's not what Bill Belichick is about. He'll go and he'll pay a corner. He'll pay like a blue chip defensive player if somebody like that's available. But for the most part, he trades Chandler Joneses. He trades Brandon Cookses. Those are the guys that he gets rid of, and he allocates the resources. He spreads it around, and he gets away with lesser talent because he's such a darn good coach. Those days seem to me like they need to be over because he no longer has Tom Brady to make that strategy work and make that strategy go anymore.
What do you
Yeah.
think? What's your well? Let's start with Belichick and just your feeling of how long. I mean, does anybody have an idea, like a best guess of how much longer you think he's going to
Not
do
not
this?
really anything concrete. I mean, I think that you can predict. He has always sort of said that he doesn't want to be the guy that's coaching until he's 80, right? He doesn't want to be. Was it Marv Levy? I think is the comparison
Okay.
that he used. He doesn't want to be Marv Levy, right? And coach until he's 90 years old. But I do think that the other element of it is that he is not going to go out like this
No,
either.
no.
So, however long it takes him to build this back up to where the Patriots are a competitor, he is not going to allow the lasting legacy of his to be that he was a product of Tom Brady. He's not going to let that happen. So,
Yeah.
I think he's in it until he figures
Well,
this out.
I think because, like you said, is true, is that when you go on this spending spree and your goal is to spend yourself to a championship, it never works.
It's
It doesn't
definitely
work.
hasn't.
So I think the logical thing, I still think, especially with Josh McDaniels still here, is all right, this is our plan. I'm probably going to coach another 5 years max. That's probably the window. That makes sense. Okay, because like you said, we're not going to get to 80. So let's just say 5 years max. Josh will take over hopefully, and we're going to build this. The three of us, Kraft, McDaniels, Bell. We're going to build this together. So within a couple of years, we're starting to win again. Within 3 or 4 years, we're back to contending for a championship. I can step away in 5 or 6 years, hopefully with another Super Bowl or two, and Josh can take over a franchise that's in really good shape, like we were the first go around. I think that's just the best way to do it. Yes, again, you're gonna have to have a slow season next season, but like I said, I mean, maybe that'll energize him again to get younger talent in there to kind of get this thing going. Because I don't care what anybody says. If Bill Belichick, I trust him just about more than anybody to take a franchise to go one step down, to go 2 or 3 steps back within 2 years. I don't think it's going to take him 4 years. I think it'll take maybe 1 or 2 years of rebuilding, and I think that's and look, I wouldn't be. I don't think the Patriot. I don't think Kraft or Belichick cares about what the fans think, because if you ain't satisfied with everything that we've given you for the past 20 years, I don't even want to hear it. So I don't
Right.
think they care about what the fans think about it. But that's what I would do, and that's actually what I'm guessing is going to happen. That's my guess.
That's not a bad guess, and I think that there's a lot to be said for what we're saying, and that if they go out and they pay Allen Robinson $20 million a year, and they pay Matthew Stafford, and they pay this guy, and they pay that guy, and yeah, I mean that would obviously look great on ESPN, and they would be the darlings of the offseason. Everybody would give them an A for offseason grades and things like that. But is it actually going to make a difference when they get out on the field next September? And is it going to actually yield results? And I think that's the biggest thing in this Buffalo Bills team, is a really great example of a quick rebuild. It really only took Buffalo, they're in year 3 right now with Josh Allen, but they slowly added pieces. It wasn't like a one-off season
Yep.
blitz, right? They slowly added pieces, and then they got to the point this past off season where they realized that they were a Stephon Diggs away from being a really, really good football team, and they made the trade. And that's when you sort of make that
That's
trade,
right.
is when you have everything else in
Yeah.
place, and that one guy
Yes.
away from being great.
Yep.
You go out and you trade for Diggs.
Yep.
So that's the difference. It's tough because on the one hand, Belichick is such a good coach and he's such a genius that he is the mastermind to put together some A+ off season and make it all work in 1 year. It's
Yeah,
possible.
but then what happens in year 2 or 3 when you've spent all this money?
Right, right,
Then you're going to wind up in a crapper anyway 2 or 3 years later.
right. And ultimately that's sort of where I think people in Patriot land are worried that Belichick's ego is going to get in the way of actually doing this the right way, because he's going to want immediate results because of, he doesn't want his legacy impacted. He doesn't want Tom Brady to have more success than him and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how much Belichick actually cares about that, but he's obviously an ultra competitive guy. I mean, that's obvious. So he's not going to want to stink like this for much longer.
Yeah, sure,
And
but just
and
because
I
you
think
stink
that
for a year or two doesn't mean that eventually you're going to get to where you want to be.
right. And I also would, mention that their draft strategy and their drafting record for the last 4 or 5 years has certainly come under a lot of fire here locally for the missed picks, the N'Keal Harrys, the Sony Michels, the Isaiah Wins. You can go right on down the line of picks that they have made, especially in the first and second round, that haven't really panned out over the last half decade. I think their draft strategy needs to change as well, to the point where when you have a Tom Brady and you have the ability to take a chance on a D2 safety like Kyle Duggar, you go ahead and you do it. And Duggar has looked great at times. Like, don't get me wrong, he's actually looked really good. But at the same time, that's not necessarily the type of player that they need right now. They don't need that developmental
Yeah.
ball
But
play.
doesn't that give you an indication that maybe they already understand that's why the plan is going to be the long-term plan? Because if it
It's possible.
wasn't, then like you said, then they would have went out and spent draft picks on players that could have helped them win this year.
Right. I just think that ultimately what they need to do with their draft strategy is they need to be the Patriots are very heavily focused when they go approach the draft with filling roles on their depth chart. They have a bunch of different roles. Every draft player gets slotted into a role. Third down running back,
Mm-hmm.
number 2 corner, free safety, right? Right on down the line. That's how they draft, and that's how they set their board, is where is this player going to play in our system, which is a really effective strategy in terms of team building and long-term team building. Obviously, it's worked for 20 years, but ultimately, you also have to get those blue chip prospects, right?
Yeah.
You still need to get a stud. You need to get
You
somebody
can't
that is
keep
an absolute
drafting in the
difference.
20s and 30s in the early second round and trading down and trading draft picks and so forth. Correct.
Those days are
Yep.
over, right? They're gonna have a top 15 pick in April. They need to use that top 15 pick on Kyle Pitts, Devontae Smith.
Yep.
So
Top
give me
player.
some.
Yep.
Right. An absolute freak.
Yep.
A guy that's going to come in here day one and be able to play and contribute. Not a Kyle Duggar who's going to take an entire
Yep.
season to develop because he's coming up from the D2 level. Those days, I think, are over and kind of walked out the door with Tom Brady.
What was the best out of the last 20 years? What was the best combo, like the brain trust, as far as scouting, drafting, and so forth? Belichick with who?
Whew. Well, I think, the early part of the dynasty, Scott Pioli and Belichick did a really great job with the entire team. And really, the first pick that Bill Belichick made as a Patriot general manager or a Patriot head coach was Richard Seymour.
That's
And at
pretty
the
damn
time,
good.
there was a lot of people that didn't like the pick. Richard Seymour was kind of this tweener defensive lineman. There was other wide receivers and other guys on the board at that point in time that a lot of people had rated higher and thought were better players. And Richard Seymour, I don't know if it will be this time around, but eventually is going to get into the Hall of Fame, I think. So that pick obviously ended up working out. And if you look at Belichick's first kind of 10 drafts in New England, all of his first round picks are are pretty much hits. Outside of Lawrence Maroney and I guess Brandon Merriweather, if you want to get really into the nitty gritty of it, they were hitting on a very high rate of draft picks for the first 10 to 12 years of the run with Belichick, and then it just sort of went cold. It went dry. That pipeline, especially at the top of the draft, has not been the same, and they haven't gotten the same impact players as they used to. There was a draft, I think it was the 2013 draft, maybe it was, where they got Dante Hightower and Chandler Jones in the same draft
Yeah.
in the first round.
Yep.
I mean, those are the types of drafts that they used to have, right? And Gerard Mayo, first round pick, Vince Wilfork, first round pick. Those were the types of guys that they used to get in here. And unfortunately, they just haven't hit it out of the park yet in recent years with that top
Have
pick.
they lost over the last handful of years when you compare the poor drafts? Have they lost too many important people, scouts, personnel guys? Have they been all, taken away to other organizations? That's because that's what I'm trying to find out here. Is there because if it's the same, if they're in the same situation with the same people about to make the same decisions, then you can't have a lot of faith there.
Right. Well, Nick Caserio and Belichick have run this building, basically hand in hand for a good while now. And Caserio is always in the rumors to be a general manager in his own right. Right now, he's director of player personnel for the Patriots as Belichick's number 2, but he's been rumored to go to Houston, other spots, things like that. Sounds like he is going to stay put for now, maybe this offseason, and isn't going to be quite in the middle of it all like he has been in the last couple of years. But I think ultimately they've lost a lot of guys in the front office that maybe we talk about the coaching staff all the time, right? Them losing assistants all the time, but we haven't talked about the John Robinsons, the Thomas Dimitrovs, those types of guys that were in the dynasty. That made the dynasty, really. That made the foundation of the dynasty in the early part of this last decade, the 2000s. That was a big part of it too, is that teams started to poach their general manager, their front office guys. Monty Eisenfor is another name who recently has left the Patriots. You can go right on down the line. There's a lot of guys that have moved on from New England, gotten promotions, gotten better gigs, full-on general manager positions for a lot of them, and that might be part of it.
Can they bring back Dimitrov? Is that a possibility?
They could bring back Dimitrov. They never brought back Pioli. I think he's maybe consulting now somewhere, or maybe has a job now in a front office, but he was sort of a free agent for a really long time, and they never brought him back. So Bill has sort of he goes both ways with the assistants in terms of bringing them back. Sometimes when you're like Josh McDaniels, when you go someplace and you do it on your own, and you don't poach his players, and you don't just try to recreate the Patriot way in a different town, then Bill Belichick doesn't burn the bridge. But the second that you go someplace else and you start taking his guys and you start trying to build the same sort of system there and just kind of copying the Patriots and bringing it where you go, that's where Bill Belichick usually takes issue with it. That's why I think, quietly behind the scenes, Bill Belichick is probably not super thrilled with Brian Flores, because Brian Flores went down to Miami. He signed Kyle Van Noy. He signed Landon Roberts. He signed Ted Karras. He signed a lot of guys down there with the Dolphins. And then on top of that, he's sort of built a team that is very Patriot-like, right? Their defense and their system is very much like the Patriots. So I think that there might be some sneakily bad blood between those two, just based off of Belichick's reputation and just what he's sort of used to. And that was something that he said in a Nick Saban Belichick special that they did on HBO, maybe it was last year. Bell said to Nick Saban, "I love the success my assistants have. I, appreciate all those guys for what they did when they were here. Don't take my players and don't try to copy what we're doing here. Do your own thing when you leave." And that's, I think, a big reason why a lot of those guys don't come back, is because Bill feels like they tried to just kind of take it with them instead of doing their.
I don't see Atlanta as one of those, so maybe Dimitrov could come back to help out Bill.
Maybe. I don't know if that's going to fix it, but I think that ultimately what does need to happen in some degree is that Bill Belichick right now for the past 5, 6, 7 years, the team has been in the AFC Championship game, long playoff runs,
Hmm.
things like that. And Bill Belichick comes in February at the combine
That's a
every
great
single
point.
year
Yep.
and says, "Okay, get me up to speed.
Yeah.
What did I miss from the entire
That's
draft
right.
process before that? Not just the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Game and all that kind of stuff, but the entire college football season." Bill doesn't pay attention to
Yeah,
that
sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
Football, the NFL year. That's what he has Casario for, and that's what he has his director of college scouting for. That's what those guys are in place to do. And unfortunately, for better or worse, over the last handful of years, the sort of narrative or what the information that's coming out is that Bill kind of parachutes in at the halfway through the process and then starts making decisions,
Yeah.
right? And that I think is something that maybe they do need another guy, whether it's Casario, maybe he can step up his game and kind of get a little bit tougher, a little bit more rigid with Bill and say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the guy we should be picking. I know you saw this guy at the Senior Bowl, and I know he
Yeah,
played
right.
for Nick down at Alabama,
Yeah.
and I know you really like Anfernee Jennings, and I know you like guys from Michigan with Josh Uche, and they went down to Mobile last year and they saw Kyle Duggar and they fell in love with him, or Bill did fall in love with him, and I know you saw him, Bill, but the best safety on the board is Antoine Winfield Jr., not Kyle Duggar,
Yep.
right? Yeah, and that's what we should be picking. That's who we should be picking, and maybe that pushback needs to be a little bit firmer moving forward.
All right, I tell you what, next week, since the Jet Patriot game means nothing, will and it could be, and more likely will be Adam Gase's final game with the Jets. And there's a whole lot of
I hope not.
what's that?
I hope not.
So there'll be a lot to talk about on the Jet side of things for sure. But Patriots are right there, big off season, especially also at the quarterback spot. So next week, we'll go down the line of free agents, potential trade possibilities,
Sure.
franchise tags, all that stuff, an early look ahead. Because, like I said, we will definitely talk again right around. Well, let's see, what do we got? March. What is it? Mid March usually, or the beginning of March?
It's usually mid
Mid
March, maybe the
March.
second week of March.
Okay, so we'll probably return early March to get ready for free agency. But last thing on this show I want to do is talk about that animation on ESPN last night. The first thing I'm reading the article because I didn't see it live. I didn't see it when it happened. I'm
Yeah,
reading
me.
the article, and as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, "Wow, I mean, must be controversial. What did they do? This must be pretty bad." And then I scroll down and I looked at it, and I'm going to play it right here as we talk. And I'm just going, okay, I'm still waiting for I'm like waiting for the cue card that says something really controversial. I'm waiting for something. And I'm saying maybe this is this probably doesn't affect me because I'm not a Patriot fan. So this has to be because it's controversial. It has to be because it's affecting Patriot fans. Maybe I would understand it better if it was my team and my coach and my quarterback and all that stuff. I don't see the controversy in it. It looked like it was all for fun, but you tell me, following the team as a fan from the fans' perspective, what did you think about it?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, and this is putting my Patriots pajamas on here and getting really into the fan side of it.
Which it looked like Tom actually was wearing. It was looking like he was wearing Tampa Bay Buccaneer pajama jersey.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing from a Patriot fan perspective, the reason why I think it was taken, with so much kind of angst, was that two things. One, there's definitely a feeling among Patriots fans that ESPN has been waiting to take their shots at New England for a very long time, right? And they've taken subtle shots at the Patriots in the past, not so subtle shots, let's face it. The 10 out of 11 footballs being underinflated, the Spygate stuff was very, that was all kind of brought to light by ESPN and a lot of peddling by ESPN to make that a story and to make that a controversy. And I think a lot of Patriots fans feel that ESPN has always been against the Patriots, always been, trying to paint them sort of as this evil empire,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
And that I think was looked at that animation on top of the fact that it basically just said it was all Brady and none of it was Bill
Okay.
and kind of just completely giving it all the credit to Tom because once Tom left everything went to crap. That I think is definitely a part of it as well. I think that it came off to a lot of Patriots fans like it was ESPN finally, their producers finally got their chance to take that big blow across the bow of the Patriots and the Patriots fandom on national television on Monday Night Football. And on top of all of that, I mean, it was just corny as hell, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was just the animations are just awful to begin with, and they're just extremely overproduced and corny. So I think there was that element of it too. But I
They
think the
look
main
good.
thing is the main thing is that ESPN does not have a great relationship with Patriot Nation.
I'd be
Very
prideful if
controversial
I'm a Patriot
relationship.
fan about that.
What'd you
I'd be
say?
prideful if I'm a Patriot fan to know that ESPN doesn't like, my team. Who needs
Well,
ESPN on my side?
right, and I think the biggest thing with ESPN is so basically what happened is that was Spygate, both locally and nationally, it got reported that the Patriots taped practices and walkthroughs of the Rams leading up to the Super Bowl, which ultimately ended up being false accusations, right? And instead of coming out and really owning that and saying that it was false, I believe ESPN came to air at like 11:55, the
Oh yeah,
11:30 Sports
cat's
Center.
out of the bag. It's too late.
Right, and said, "Oh, we're sorry. That part of our story wasn't factual, and everybody was already asleep, and nobody really paid attention to it. And now that is a stain on Bill
Sure,
Belichick's legacy
that's
forever.
right.
That they claim, and the Rams players to this day still insist that they did film. A lot of Rams players, I should say, filmed their walkthroughs and their practices, when in reality the Patriots were just taping signals from the sideline during games, not behind the scenes at practices and stuff like that. Then Deflategate happens, and Chris Mortensen comes out and he reports that 10 out of the 11 footballs that the Patriots were using in the AFC Championship game were underinflated, were against the legal limit. That turned out to be false as well, and ESPN never really owned that either. Mortensen never really owned it. I think the tweet actually might still be up. I don't think he ever deleted the report that was false, and that
That's what
our
everybody
Patriots,
believes. Yeah,
right. That's what everybody
dirty
believes.
politics. That's what that is.
Right. Everybody believes that they taped the Rams practices and walkthroughs before the Super Bowl 36, obviously. And everybody believes that 10 out of 11 balls were below the PSI limit and Tom Brady deserved the Deflategate suspension, this, that, the other thing. Both of those stories, and Seth Wickersham has to own some of this too, because he was one of those guys that did those behind the scenes big, exposés where he goes and he talks to 50 different people about it and stuff like that. ESPN seemed to have a stake in making that a national controversy. They wanted to make it a story for their ratings, for whatever the case may be, and Patriots fans will never forget it. They'll never forget it.
They must have piled. They must have really piled on the Kraft story last year. Then
I believe that one. I don't know if it was as big as the cheating scandals
uh-huh.
were, but ultimately, I think that last night the little cartoon thing that they did, it irked Patriots fans the wrong way, because it just seems like every single time ESPN has a chance to take a swing at the Patriots, they do it, and that's sort of how Patriots fans
All
feel.
right. Well, then, yeah, that's what I felt. Is that it had to have been you really don't know unless you're a Patriot fan what to feel when you see that. Except, like you said, if you think the animation is corny or whatever the case may be, and it is, it
But we can
is.
have fun with that, right?
Yeah.
The Fox cutouts that they do that are like the caricature versions of the players after they score touchdowns. Those are corny too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And we can have fun with those. I know there's posts out there of like all of them that have ever been aired, and everybody's little face, caricature sketch and stuff like that. But ultimately, it comes back to Spygate, Deflategate, and how ESPN really carried the water of getting those things really blown out of proportion into the story that it ended up being. I mean, the Deflategate thing almost went to the Supreme Court, for crying out loud. That was just unbelievable,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Well, that I think that at this point in time, though, and it's funny because it really, it's not because of sports at all, but because of ESPN's, foray into politics. They're now, you can kind of put them in the same category as some people, believe is some networks or a lot of networks and the news in general, fake news. We don't believe them anymore. That's what people think about ESPN now. They've been lumped into it, but deservedly so. It's interesting that it wasn't because of anything that happened with Deflategate, and so forth. It was because of politics and other things, but they got what they deserve.
Yeah,
Took a while, but
they have a long way to go, and I don't know if they ever will win Patriots fans back over. And on top of that, from what I understand, and rightfully so, because the Bills deserve all the credit in the world, but there was a lot of gushing about Buffalo on the broadcast last night as well. So it just the whole setup of it, I think, was just it was a recipe for disaster for Patriots fans.
And still there are 31 other fan bases in the NFL that would still love to be in the Patriots shoes today. So
I don't know about that anymore.
Yes. Well, you don't want to be fast. You don't want to fast forward, obviously, the 20 years and just wake up after 20 years and go, "Oh, is that my team?" No, you want to live through it. But being able to live through 20 years of
there'll never be another run like it, especially nowadays with free agency and salary cap era. The team that I think has the record for the longest streak of consecutive winning seasons was the Dallas Cowboys.
Yes.
In the 70s and the 80s. That was pre-free agency, right? That was before other teams would go out and poach a player.
That's when if you drafted well, you kick butt.
You're a wagon. Right. And the Patriots were in a much different era of sports just in general, and we're still able to maintain it for 20 years. It will never be replicated.
Yeah, and that's true. So, but it's just, it's human when you're a fan, and I get it. I know I'm not trying to say that you should be happy when you lose, but if you've lived through the last 20 years, not the last 5, maybe there are a lot of young guys that have just lived through the last 5 or 6, but you lived through the last 20, you really kind of, I'm sorry, but you just don't have any, you shouldn't, there's nothing to feel bad about, mad about. Sure, you could be thinking, like you said, about, well, how is this thing going to go in the future? What you said before about saying that, it seems to me that there are a lot of Patriot fans out there that do want Belichick to take this the slow way. Let's rebuild this the right way. That is the right way to feel, and the way that a fan base should feel after the last 20 years. Let's do this the right way. If it means we have a couple of bad years, that's okay. But let's no quick fixes. And if a lot of fans feel that way, then good for them.
Right, and it's also important to remember the first time around when the Patriots did this in the early 2000s, that team was a lot in part the Bill Parcells team that went to the Super Bowl against the Packers and lost to Brett Favre in Green Bay and all those years ago. That team was on the basis Ty Law, Lawyer Malloy, Teddy Bruschi, Willie McGinnis. A lot of those guys were drafted before Bill Belichick even got here. Well, he was an assistant for Parcells for a couple of years there, but before Bill Belichick became the head coach. And that's sort of, I think, what Patriots fans are hopeful of, is that they can kind of steal from the end of the Brady era, bring, Stephon Gilmore and Devin McCourty and some of those guys with them into this next chapter and have another run where they kind of find the quarterback again and they make it work.
Evan, great job as always. Next week, we'll talk more about the offseason. We'll get a kickstart ahead. So looking forward to doing that with you next week. And again, you have your jet preview edition on CLNS Media. That's on Thursday, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Thanks, Evan. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Greg.